Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Ichigo was king of Hueco Mundo and Harem Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the LordVishnu for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Let's start this video. Ichigo's eyes were hollow and lifeless as he stared at the floor of his cell. How had it all gone so wrong? Not 24 hours ago he seemed to be on top of the world. He had finished what was said to be nearly impossible and attained his Bankai after a mere 3 days. He had reached what was supposedly the pinnacle of a Shinigami's ability, and had finally obtained the power to save Rukia and protect his friends. He felt pride. He felt joy. He felt strong. Only for him to leave his training sanctuary and have it all turned to ashes in his mouth. Ishida and Orihime were dead. Killed in action against a captain named Mayuri Kuratsuchi. Ichigo wished that Yoruchi hadn't told him, that she had waited just a few extra hours before letting him know. If she had, then he wouldn't have faltered. He wouldn't have wasted a few precious minutes reeling from their deaths. He would have reached Rukia in time to stop the execution rather than getting there just to see her being immolated by the Sokayaku. The peaceful look of acceptance on her face still haunted him whenever he shut his eyes. The memories of what happened next were somewhat hazy. He remembered releasing his Bankai and charging at Byakuya in a rage. Furious that he stood by as his sister was executed. Then there was an ungodly large amount of spiritual pressure released by the old man with the long beard and wooden cane. The next clear memory he had was waking up in this cell with spirit suppression cuffs over his wrists and ankles. Ichigo. His cellmate called. Do you know what happened to Yoruchi and Ganju? Ichigo's gaze drifted slowly over to the oversized man chained up alongside him. The only other known survivor of this foolish escapade into Soul Society. No, Chad, I don't. Yoruchi is probably fine, but I haven't seen Ganju in days. He's likely dead just like the others. He muttered softly. Chad frowned at the dark tone in his friend's voice. It's not your fault, Ichigo. Ichigo scoffed with a hoarse throat. How is it not? I'm the one who took Rukia's powers. I'm the one who got her arrested. I'm the reason you guys came to Soul Society. Everything that has happened, all of it, the reason they're dead, it's because of me. Oh? How surprising. A third voice announced, sounding thoroughly amused. You don't really believe all that, do you? Ichigo's and Chad's heads both snapped up towards the newcomer. A male Shinigami with brown hair and dressed in a white Haori approached the cell with a smile on his face and smug laughter in his eyes. A captain? Ichigo muttered in surprise before processing what was actually said. What the hell do you mean by that? Who are you? He demanded with a shout. A little of the laughter in the man's eyes was replaced by puzzlement, and his smile shrank ever so slightly. Who am I? Do you honestly not know? He questioned with seeming sincerity. Did your father never mention me? Did Kisuke Urahara not even show you the face of his enemy? You do work for the man, don't you? He is the one who sent you here, is he not? Ichigo's brow furrowed at the condescending tone. Urahara? What does he have to do with this? And why would my father know anyone in Soul Society? I never told him anything about Shinigami. The man's look shifted from mild confusion to one of pity as his expression fell down to neutral. I see. You really are nothing more than an unwitting pawn in all this, aren't you? They sent you off to die without bothering to explain a single thing. He said more to the room than his audience. What a waste. He added with a sigh. Ichigo's anger rose. You better start making sense or calm yourself, Ichigo Kurosaki. I will explain in a moment. My name is Sosuke Aizen, and until a few days ago I was captain of the 5th Division of the Godai 13. You could say that I chose to tender my resignation shortly after your arrival. For the past 100 years I have been engaged in a shadow war with the ex-captain of the 12th Division Kisuke Urahara after he fled Soul Society for being found guilty of treason. At the center of that war was this. Aizen proclaimed as he reached into his sleeve and produced a small blue and purple orb the size of a large marble. A small fire danced brilliantly in its center that drew the attention of both prisoners. One couldn't help but look upon it. 100 years over that little thing? Ichigo breathed out. Aizen smiled. Yes, it does sound strange, doesn't it? So much time for such a small thing. However, I assure you that this small artifact known as the Hogyoku is capable of some truly incredible things. Perhaps I will tell you more on it later, Aizen said serenely as he repocketed the item. For 100 years this object was hidden from me, always just beyond my grasp, but then something happened a few months ago. An unexpected wildcard to change Kisuke Urahara's strategy. Would you care to guess what event that was, Ichigo Kurosaki? What? Ichigo stuttered. still trying to mentally play catch-up all the information he was receiving. Urahara was a captain? Found guilty of treason? And earlier this man Aizen implied that his goofball father was somehow involved with Soul Society. A young unranked Shinigami was forced to grant her powers over to a human. Sound familiar? While normally such an occurrence would resolve itself on its own and warrant nothing more than a slap on the wrist from the Shinigami's superior, this young Shinigami woman had the distinct misfortune of losing her powers in the same area where Kisuke Urahara was hiding in the living world. Tell me, Ichigo Kurosaki, did Rukia Kichiki ever mention or perhaps complain that her powers should have returned to her after some time but for some reason did not? Why, yeah. She did. Are you saying Urahara is the reason behind that? Ichigo asked, desperate to finally start receiving answers. Aizen smiled. This conversation was already proceeding better than anticipated. Exactly. Kisuke Urahara was so desperate to keep the Hogyoku away from me that he was willing to ruin that young lady's life. He approached Rukia Kichiki that very night, offering her a Jigai to use while she awaited the return of her abilities. If it were a normal Jigai, then the process would have taken approximately 10 to 12 days. The girl's powers would return to her, she would leave for Soul Society, and you would return to your simple life. So one must ask oneself the question. Why did this not happen? For a change it was the silent giant who spoke up. It would mean that the Jigai Urahara offered Rukia wasn't normal. Correct, Yasutora Sato? Aizen said like a teacher congratulating a student. The Jigai Kisuke Urahara provided was not normal in any sense of the word. It was a one-of-a-kind custom Jigai that would slowly transform its user from a Shinigami soul into an ordinary human one. In addition, through this Jigai he managed to hide the Hogyoku in the one place where no one should ever be able to find it. Inside Rukia Kichiki's very soul. If everything went according to his plan, young Rukia would have been stranded in the living world away from everyone she knew for the rest of her natural life. A considerably shortened life, since humans live for under 100 years whilst Shinigami can easily reach 10 times that. He was going to ruin Rukia's entire life just to stop you from getting that dumb little marble. Ichigo questioned in outrage. Yes, Ichigo. He was. And he very nearly succeeded. Aizen replied calmly. His features then shifted into a pensive, almost sorrowful look. For the next part of this story I'm going to have to ask that you try and refrain from yelling. It involves me taking some actions you will not appreciate. After I learned of Rukia Kichiki being stuck without her powers in Karakura town, I was able to piece together what Kisuke Urahara's plan was and developed appropriate counter measures. I manipulated events so that Captain Kichiki and Vice Captain Abarai would be deployed to return her to Soul Society. I need not remind you on how that encounter played out. Once Rukia Kichiki and far more importantly the Hogyoku were back in Soul Society, I once again used my own influence to ensure that she was executed by the Sokayaku. Only its power was great enough to burn away the soul but not harm any foreign. The chains rattled violently as Ichigo strained against his bindings. You bastard! You killed her! He screamed with furious tears in his eyes. Do you hate me, Ichigo Kurosaki? Aizen asked, totally unfazed. Go ahead. I don't mind. I am not a saintly man. I have no compunctions about staining my hands with blood in order to get what I want. Especially the blood of a complete stranger. I knew of no other guaranteed way to separate her from the Hogyoku. If it's any consolation to you, her death was painless. The Sokayaku burned so hot that it would have been quicker than falling asleep. A far better fate than most Shinigami receive. A painful death of screaming in agony while being ripped apart in combat. That's no excuse, there must have been another way, there had to be. Ichigo whispered mostly to himself as his tears splashed against the stone floor. I did have some backup contingencies in place, but all of them were considerably more violent, and likely would have killed the girl anyway. But let us get back to the subject of you. I must say I was rather surprised when you invaded Siriidii with a misfit band of empowered humans, and your cousin in order to take back Rukia Kichiki. I was expecting Kisuke Urahara to send Yoruichi Shihoin or perhaps even your father to try and retrieve the Hogyoku. Not a bunch of untested teenagers who haven't the slightest idea what they're doing. Ichigo's eyes widened. My cousin? And that's the second time you've mentioned my father. How is he involved here? Tell me, how easily the rat walks into the trap, Aizen mused to himself. Isshin Kurosaki. Formerly Isshin Shiba, uncle to Kokaku and Ganju Shiba and ex-captain of the 10th Division, disappeared almost 2 decades ago from Soul Society, and currently wanted for dereliction of duty. Did you never question why you conveniently had your own Shinigami powers to call upon after Rukia Kichiki's were lost to you? Not to mention that your powers were greater than most of Soul Society's elites? Did you think you were special? Did you think it was your resolve granting you all your strength? I'm sorry, boy, but it's just a simple case of genetics. Your father really never mentioned this, even after you obtained Shinigami abilities? Aizen asked with faux concern. No, never, he never mentioned a damn thing. Ichigo spat angrily as he stared at the ground of his cell. Aizen put on his best comforting face and softened his voice. Ichigo Kurosaki. When I first walked into this cell it was on a whim. To thank you for making such a scene at Sokaiku Hill after the execution that I was able to grab the Hogyoka completely undetected. A parting barb to send at one who I presumed was a loyal soldier of my enemy. Now I see that this is not the case. So I would like to offer you something instead. What's that? You may not be aware of this yet, but your state executions are both being scheduled right now. In just about a week's time you will both be dead. Most likely by beheading. You have but two choices. Option 1. You can stay in this cell and await whatever fate Soul Society deems appropriate for you, or you can go with door number 2, and that is, join me. As I mentioned earlier, I have effectively resigned from the Godai 13. 2 other captains alongside myself have decided to rebel against the status quo. We seek a complete overhaul of the current system. I'm gathering an army to tear down this arrogant and outdated place. I would like to offer both you and your friend Yasutora Sato a place in that army. I offer you a chance to live. A chance to avenge the deaths of your friends. Perhaps even a chance to strike back at Kasuke Urahara, who played you like a fiddle so expertly. And if one day you choose to come for my head for the part 1 played in Rukia Kuchiki's death, then I will not object. Ichigo sat there silently for a few moments. Mulling over everything he had learned in the past few minutes, he turned to his best friend with an obvious question etched on his face. What do you think? I have no family or real ties left in the living world, Ichigo. When I followed you here I knew that I might die or that my life might be changed forever. The tall man spoke. Whatever you decide, I'm with you to the end. He promised, somehow finding the inner strength to smile on this darkest of all days. If it makes it any easier, I promise that I will never lie to you, Ichigo. Aizen lied. Ichigo's eyes hardened with determination as he reached his decision. All right, Aizen. Deal. But one day I will come for you over what you did to Rukia. Aizen smiled as the conversation finished exactly the way he planned it to. That is acceptable. Now let us be off. It is time to reconvene with my other allies, Aizen said as he diced the prison bars with a quick slash and removed the suppression cuffs from the prisoners with 2 more. And where's that? Ichigo asked as he rubbed one of his wrists. Hueco Mundo. Yoruichi raced across the rooftops, her legs blurring from the speed at which she moved. At the edge of the final building she bent her knees at the last possible moment, and leapt towards a low-hanging window on the prison tower. She grasped onto the sill of the opening and with practiced perfection did a reverse flip through the gap and into the structure, right into a pack of 4 guards. Perfect. Hey you! One of them called as his hand reached for his weapon. No one's allowed in URGH. The man was silenced as Yoruichi closed the distance in an instant and buried her fist into his gut. Before any of the others could process what had happened, she spun around and kicked a second man in the side of the head, and then delivered an upwards palm strike to the chin of a third. The only guard still conscious opened his mouth to speak, but his words died in his throat when he was picked up and slammed painfully against the stone wall. Yoruichi produced a short blade from inside her sleeve and held it a mere half-inch away from one of the man's eyes. Your 2 newest prisoners. The Ryokas who invaded Suriidai a few days ago. What cell are they in? She asked with steel in her voice. F5th floor. Cell N number S7. The man stammered fearfully. Thanks. Yoruichi said with a genuine smile before giving the man a swift chop to the neck and rendering him unconscious. The final guard hadn't even finished crumbling to the floor in the short time it took for Yoruichi to flash to the end of the hallway and start ascending the stairs to the next floor. 3rd floor, 4th floor, dodge another patrol of guards, 5th floor. This is it. Yoruichi burst onto the 5th floor and her eyes immediately widened in alarm. Every guard on the floor was dead, some lying face down in pools of blood whereas others were slumped against the once pristine white walls. Ichigo. Chad. Yoruichi screamed as she ran to the door labeled Cell 7. She kicked the door open and caught the quickest glimpse of a Garganta portal snapping shut, leaving behind an empty cell and a few broken restraints. Oh shit. Suriidai, 13th Division Captain's Barracks. Captains Kairaku and Yukitake sat in somber silence staring at cups of tea in their hands. The only sounds were the occasional clank of a sozu in the small garden pond outside and the distant shuffling of other Shinigami going about their business. It's not your fault, Joshiro. There are some things in this world we just can't control. Kairaku said quietly as he stirred his cup around lightly. How am I supposed to accept that, Shunsui? Yukitake replied with sadness in his voice. 1 minute and 3 seconds. That's how late I arrived with the Shihoin shield. If I had undone the seals just a little bit faster, if I had gotten up just a little bit earlier in the morning, if I had just one less coughing fit on the way to the execution grounds, if any of those occurred, then I would have gotten there before Kachiki died, and we could have destroyed the Sokaiku together. Then Rukia would still be alive. You can't be sure of that, Kayaraka replied. Let's say we succeeded in taking out that oversized spear. What then? Kachiki would still have a death sentence hanging over her head. That Ryoka boy might have gotten her out, Yukitake protested weakly. Gotten her away from old man Yama? Kayaraka questioned lightly but skeptically. You saw how quickly the commander slapped him down after he showed up. Yukitake shook his head. You know as well as I, Shunsui, that had our plan succeeded, then Yamamoto's attention would have been entirely on us. That Ryoka would have barely factored into his peripheral vision at that point. There were still Captain Suifeng and Kachiki present. Do you really think the boy could have fought both of them? Yukitake sighed. Probably not. But the Ryoka did have a Bankai. Anything is possible, not just probably not. It'd be impossible. There's no way he could win against both. Suifeng would only need him distracted for a moment before she killed him with that scary power of hers. Kayaraka reached out gently and laid his hand on his best friend's shoulder. You have to accept it, Joshiro. Your subordinate still would have died. She wasn't just a subordinate. Yukitake nearly shouted. She was the last connection I had to my previous Lieutenant Kaien. I wanted her to take his place someday. The captain of the 13th protested loudly before turning to the side for a small fit of coughing. It was Shunsui's turn to sigh. You're right. I'm sorry. But it doesn't change the fact that she's gone. The only thing we can do now is avenge her. We know from the revelations brought forth by Captain Unohana that Aizen was manipulating everything by pretending to be the Central 46. What we don't know is the why. Why did Aizen arrange for Rukia's death in such a way? What happened to her in the living world that made her so important? And where have he, Ikemaru, and Tozen disappeared to? Yukitake's eyes hardened. I don't know. But those are all things I intend to find out. Inside the Garganta, in between Soul Society and Hueco Mundo. So why are your allies waiting in Hueco Mundo? Isn't it dangerous with all the hollows running around? Ichigo asked in a bored tone as the group of 3 walked at a comfortable pace. Tell me, Ichigo Kurosaki, what do you know? Stop that. Stop using people's full names every time you say them. It's weird, uncomfortable, and gives me the creeps. Ichigo exclaimed in annoyance. Aizen chuckled briefly to himself. My apologies, Ichigo. It is merely an old habit of mine. But as I was saying, what do you know about Arankar? Never heard of them. Ichigo replied bluntly. Chad? Ichigo asked, looking to his friend. The silent giant simply shook his head in the negative. I see. I expected as much. Before I explain to you both what an Arankar is, I should preface it with an explanation of the various types of Minos Grande that exist within Hueco Mundo. Aizen said. Minos Grande? You mean those black and white hollows that are as tall as skyscrapers? Ichigo asked. I fought one of those before. That Zero thing it used was pretty serious. Aizen nodded. Indeed. That brand of Minos is known as a Jillian. Shinigami ranked below that of 7th seat in their respective divisions are forbidden from fighting them alone. Even if you are a high-ranking officer and have clearance to engage them in combat, it is probably wiser to call for backup. Such is their terrifying power. However, of the 3 classes of Minos Grande that exist, Jillian are by far the weakest. What? Ichigo yelped in surprise. But that thing nearly killed me. And it's the weakest? Do not sell yourself so short, Ichigo. You are a captain-class Shinigami now. You could likely slay them by the dozens and not even tire with the power you now possess. Although at his current strength, Sato should be a tad more cautious if he sees one. Chad reflexively clenched his fist at the mention. For the moment he thought, almost all Jillians are identical. Mindless beasts that are too sluggish to properly wield the power at their disposal. Aizen continued, but on occasion one will be born that is unique. One that has retained its intelligence and sense of individualism. In these cases, the unique Jillian will have an uncontrollable urge to feed on its brethren. It will continue to consume its mindless siblings until an internal change is triggered. It is here when the Jillian evolves into the second type of Minos Grande. The Ajuchas. What are they like? Chad asked with the tiniest hint of nervousness in his voice. It varies. Aizen answered with a small shake of his hand. Ajuchas have as much diversity among them as that of regular hollows. Unlike the Jillian, whose power is fairly uniform, the Ajuchas have strengths all over the place. The only thing you can be sure of is that it will be stronger than a Jillian, perhaps by only a little and perhaps by a massive amount. All Ajuchas have the capability to speak, to think, to feel complex emotions, and even contemplate their own existence. Although many choose to ignore these things because of the cursed life all Ajuchas are forced to live. A cursed life? Ichigo questioned with a slight frown. Yes. A horrible existence. As I said before, Ajuchas have the ability to think and to feel. In a land full of mindless, bloodthirsty hollows, one might think that the Ajuchas would have a sense of kinship with each other. However, this is rarely the case. The uncontrollable hunger from when they were unique Jillians carries over into their new stage of evolution. The Ajuchas are forced to compete and hunt each other over the vast emptiness of Hueco Mundo, or they will regress. Go too long without eating and they will revert back into a mindless Jillian. Know this, Ichigo. Once an Ajuchas regresses into a Jillian, there is absolutely zero chance of ever evolving again. Can you imagine such a life, Ichigo? To be forced to constantly hunt those that could potentially be your companions, or you will lose your sense of self forever? Ichigo failed to find the words. It truly does sound like a curse. Chad commented. There are only two ways for an Ajuchas to end the cycle and still manage to retain their sense of self. The first is to reach the final stage of evolution, the third type of Minos Grande. The Vasto Lord. The pinnacle of hollow evolution, and a being that could fight a weaker Shinigami captain with one hand tied behind its back. Not all Ajuchas have the ability to reach this final stage. In fact, I speculate that very few of them do, similar to how not all Shinigami have the ability to become a captain no matter how much they push themselves. Sometimes destiny is just not on your side. What's the second way? Ichigo inquired. A method very obscure and even more painful. At least it used to be. Unlike becoming a Vasto Lord, this method is not something that is instinctively known to hollows. This is a path that they must stumble upon on their own by dumb luck, or by encountering another hollow that has already made the change. The second way is for a hollow to rip away their own mask and obtain Shinigami powers. This is what is known as an Arrancar, and these hybrid beings are who we're going to meet now. Chad said as he mentally connected the dots. Correct. Over many years I have been secretly putting together an army of unique Jillian and Ajuchas class hollows, helping them escape the cycle of death and unending hunger by transforming them into Arrancar. As I said before, this process was quite painful originally, but I have found a way to circumvent that. How? Ichigo asked with rapt attention. Aizen smiled at how enraptured Ichigo was becoming with the lecture. A few carefully selected words and Aizen could tell the boy was already sympathetic to the plight of the Ajuchas, which leads to sympathy with most Arrancar for trying to escape their fate, which will in turn lead to sympathy towards Aizen himself for liberating them. With my own version of the Hogyoku, Aizen answered. Originally, rather than try and obtain Urahara's Hogyoku from him, I endeavored to create my own. However, despite constant attempts and decades of research, I was only partially successful. I created an incomplete version that can easily transform hollows into Arrancar, but it is unable to help with greater tasks. I am hoping that by combining Urahara's Hogyoku with my own that I will get an artifact more powerful than either one is individually. What are you hoping it will do? Chad asked. Aizen refrained from smirking. A man must keep a few secrets, mustn't he? He replied light-heartedly. Perhaps I will tell you later. It seems we've arrived. The three men reached a light at the end of the dimensional tunnel and hopped out into what could only be called a throne room. It was immaculately clean and incredibly tall. The sides were lined with cylindrical pillars and a single chair sat in the center of the room, elevated by a gigantic stone slab. Welcome to Las Noches, Aizen said with a smile. Whoa, are we really in Hueco Mundo? This isn't what I imagined at all, Ichigo said as he glanced around. Oh my. Is that the Ryoka boy I met at the gate in Suriidai? An uncomfortably familiar voice rang out. Ichigo and Chad turned around to the sight of two more Shinigami captains. The white-haired fox-like man who expelled Ichigo from his initial attempt at invading Suriidai, and a purple-haired dark-skinned man who appeared to be blind. I certainly wasn't expecting this when you said you had a little detour to make, Captain Aizen, the white-haired man commented as he leered creepily at Ichigo and Chad. It seems that fortune has decided to gift us with two more allies. And I no longer hold the rank of Captain Jin, Aizen replied. Nonsense, Jin dismissed as he waved the comment away with one hand. You'll always be Captain Aizen to me. Well, suit yourself. Aizen relented in amusement. Ichigo, Sato. Allow me to introduce the two Shinigami who have chosen to revolt alongside me. former captains of the 3rd and 9th Divisions Ikamaru Jin and Kanaim Tozen. Hiya! I'm betting we'll get along really well, don't you think? We'll be the best of friends in no time. Ikamaru said with a wave and an exceedingly wide snake-like grin. Yeah, sure, Ichigo answered nervously as both he and Chad started to sweat uncomfortably. Tozen approached the two with a blank expression. Kurosaki. Sato. I am sorry for what happened to your friends. Together we will ensure that justice is done for them. If there is anything I can help you with, please feel free to ask. Ichigo's expression sunk slightly, suddenly remembering the events that led them here while Chad managed to get out a polite thank you Kanaim. Tozen gave a simple nod of acknowledgement, and then turned to his leader. Lord Aizen. I have gathered the Espada in the meeting room as you requested before we separated. Excellent Kanaim. Let us be off then. As the 5 men started to walk, Ichigo leaned over to Chad and whispered, did that guy really just call him Lord Aizen? Think nothing of it, Ichigo. Aizen said, overhearing the comment. A few of the Arrancar started referring to me like that at some point. I merely never corrected them. It seems now that our defection is official, Kanaim has chosen to adopt the moniker as well. May I ask something somewhat unrelated? Chad spoke up in a perplexed tone. By all means. Aizen replied. Why are the Arrancar following you? You've mentioned that you're rebelling against the corruption and status quo of Soul Society, but I don't see why these Arrancar would care when they live here in Hueco Mundo. Oh? It seems there's a mind under all that muscle. Aizen commented in good humor. As with any army, the reasons vary from soldier to soldier. A few have encountered Shinigami in the past when they were normal hollows and still hold a grudge. Some have retained their bloodthirsty nature and are simply itching for a fight. Then there are those who feel they owe me for helping them escape the unending cycle of hunting their own kin. The largest group, however, are those that just want to prove they have the right to exist. What do you mean by that? Ichigo demanded indignantly. Who says they can't exist? Soul Society, of course. One might think that the top Shinigami would be glad for a hollow who has escaped the terrible fate of the Ajuchas. Be glad for the sentient hollow that can think and feel and no longer has to constantly kill to survive. But instead, Soul Society considers the Arrancar an abomination. In their eyes, a hollow is a hollow and a Shinigami is a Shinigami. There can be no mixing of their powers. In the few times throughout history that Arrancar have appeared, they have always been hunted down with extreme prejudice. Soul Society has even sent hunting parties of high-ranking officers into Hueco Mundo itself to dispose of them. Simply for existing. That's horrible! Ichigo yelled, outraged. I agree. If you want to know more, we can discuss it later. Aizen remarked as they finally reached their destination. A set of large double doors that led to the meeting room. In here you will meet the Espada, the 10 most powerful Arrancar in Hueco Mundo. Please hold your tongue during the meeting, Ichigo. For the moment you are a stranger to them. We don't need any unnecessary outbursts. Tozen pushed open the door and stepped to the left to usher everyone inside. Ichigo and Chad stepped into the room and immediately felt 10 pairs of eyes swivel onto them. Chad hid his surprise at their physical appearance well, but Ichigo didn't. They looked just like people. A few hollow parts here and there, but that's it. I was expecting monsters. Are these really Arrancar? These are what Soul Society considers abominations. Aizen chuckled at Ichigo's shocked expression as he sat down in the chair at the head of the table. I knew I was forgetting to mention something. Although perhaps this way it works out even better. He mused to himself. Hello, my dear Espada. I have returned once again from Soul Society, and this time I am here to stay. Before we begin the meeting, let us address the elephant in the room, as the humans say. This is Ichigo Kurosaki and Yasutora Sato. Aizen intoned as he gestured to the two standing behind his chair. 2 prisoners of Soul Society that I chose to liberate on my way out. They will be joining us in our cause. Young Ichigo here has a good deal of power but not the experience to properly use it, whereas I believe Sato's powers themselves are still under development. I would like one of you to assist them in their growth while they are my guests here in Las Noches. Silence reigned the room for a few moments, as most of the Espada looked away or simply pretended they had not heard the request. Do I have a volunteer? Aizen asked with a less amused tone. Finally a single Espada stood and stared directly at the head of the table. Lord Aizen. I believe my fraction and I will be more than capable of doing what you ask. I can begin as soon as the meeting ends. Excellent. Ichigo, Sato. You should be honored to have such a high-ranking Arrancar mentoring for you. Allow me to introduce your training partner for the next few weeks. Espada number 5. Ichigo peeked around the corner of Aizen's large chair to get a better look at the Arrancar in question, and was forced to avert his gaze after a few seconds. He didn't want to be caught blushing in such a serious moment. Nilio tu Odershve. Kisuk slammed onto the floor from the impact of the punch, and raised his hand up to tenderly rub his stinging cheek. What do you mean you and Tezsai didn't go with them? Isshin screamed at the man he had just slugged in the face. You didn't seem to have a problem with the idea when I was training your son before he left. Kisuk grumbled from the ground. I thought you were all going. That you'd be right alongside him every step of the way. I did send Yoruchi, Kisuk defended weakly. And look what good it did. Isshin roared. Only a single captain-level chaperone to watch over 4 untrained kids invading an enemy stronghold. Do you realize I have to go tell Ryukin that his only child is dead after I'm done here? And I have no goddamn clue what I'll say to that Tatsuki girl when she inevitably comes asking around. What the hell were you thinking sitting at home? Kisuk fought back despite feeling contrite. Tezsai and I both have been framed for treason. I was thinking we shouldn't go somewhere where there's a death sentence hanging over our heads. Don't give me that bullshit. With all your gadgets and trinkets you could have avoided detection easily. And now my son, my only son, is in the hands of that monster. Who knows what kinds of lies and half-truths he's filling his head. Why? That's enough. Urusahai screamed from the corner where she was sitting cross-legged. We get it, Isshin. We added up. There's nothing we can do to change that. What we need to be discussing is what our next move should be. Isshin huffed, and crossed his arms in annoyance, as Urahara pushed himself off the ground. Kisuk picked his hat up off the floor and walked over to the counter to pour himself some tea. Yoruchi said that Soul Society was buzzing with the news of Aizen's betrayal as she was leaving. Evidently he was confronted by Captain Unohana and revealed both his true nature and the actual abilities of his Zanpakuto. Soul Society's next move will be to investigate where he has gone, and why he arranged Rukia's death in the manner that he did. In the next couple of days an investigation team should show up in Karakura to search for clues. We need to find whoever is leading that team and inform them of what we know. What if an investigation team doesn't show up? Isshin asked in irritation, refusing to even look at Urahara. They will. But I'll begin preparing another portal to Soul Society for Yurichi just in case. Isshin sighed. Fine. I expect you to keep me updated. Now if you'll excuse me, I need to go probably get punched in the face by Ryukin and then have a very long and painful conversation with my daughters. Yorichi's expression rose a bit in surprise. You're gonna bring them into the know? She questioned. I honestly don't see how I can avoid it. Hueco Mundo, the desert just outside Las Noches. Chad held his transformed right arm above his head, trying in vain to repel the giant kanabo that Dondo Chaka was swinging down on him. Chad's knees nearly buckled under the strain and sweat poured down his neck as he pushed back against the Arrancar's unusual Zanpakuto. He raised his human arm up to supplement, and only then did he manage to stabilize. Oi! Sato. You're open. Pesh announced as he suddenly appeared with a buzz of sonito. Chad's eyes barely had time to widen before his second attacker rammed his leg into the man's midsection. Chad's mouth was wrenched open as he spat up a little blood from the blow. Momentum kicked in not a half second later, sending the tall man flying across the battlefield. The empowered human skidded and tumbled across the sand before finally managing to right himself. Panting heavily, he rose to one knee and fired off a retaliatory blast of blue energy from his right hand. An attack that his opponents easily dodged. Chad! Ichigo called out in worry. Just hang in there. You don't have time to be distracted, Ichigo. Neliel admonished as she sliced him across the leg. A deliberately small wound. A reprimand for not paying attention. His sixth injury in only half as many minutes. Take this seriously, she demanded. I am taking this seriously. Ichigo yelled back, barely blocking another attack with his oversized kyber blade. No, you're not. Neliel insisted in a monotone. You haven't made a single attempt at being anything but defensive. I'm deliberately not using Sonito, and you still can't keep up with my speed. I'm getting bored, Ichigo. Did you really defeat a captain-level Shinigami fighting like this? She questioned, her sword still swinging in a flurry. It's not my fault you're stronger than me, Ichigo protested, each word separated by the sounds of two swords clanging against each other. Neliel looked disappointed. If that were the only problem, then you just release your Bankai. The increase in Ryatsu alone would even the playing field at the level I'm fighting you at. Yet you haven't. You're not even trying to win. Neliel ducked past Ichigo's first offensive swing of the match and stepped into his guard. She thrust her palm hard into his chest, launching him several meters away. Ichigo let loose a small gasp as he hit the ground and started sliding across the desert. Tell me the real reason you're holding back. Now, Neliel commanded in a no-nonsense tone, ominously descending on his new location with her sword at her side. I'm not holding back. Ichigo insisted as he brushed himself off and took another defensive pose. Neilio scowled. Lying is only going to make me angrier. Arg, fine. I just have a hard time fighting against beautiful women, okay? Ichigo shouted in frustration. Neilio stopped her walk mid-stride and the annoyance in her eyes was replaced by bewilderment. Ichigo meanwhile blushed red at his unintentional outburst, and turned his head away to avoid eye contact. Neilio sputtered before breaking out into full-bellied laughter, bending over at the waist as she failed to contain herself. Ichigo tried to look offended at being laughed at but utterly failed as he noticed how childlike his opponent sounded. When Neilio eventually rose her head again, the Arrancar's eyes appeared softer now, almost whimsical. Oh, Ichigo. I'm flattered. Really. That's very sweet. But you really do need to start taking this seriously, Neilio warned as she stretched her palm out towards Ichigo. Because if you don't, Neilio's expression suddenly hardened again, as little flicks of bright purple energy began to coalesce into a sphere above her hand. Ichigo's grip on his sword tightened as the ball quickly reached what seemed like critical mass, and it shone brilliantly, the entire area taking on a purplish hue from its light. You're gonna die. Zero. The energy exploded outward at incredible speed with the distinctive vroom sound that Zeros are known for. Oh, that ain't good. Ichigo quickly thought in a panic. Getsuga Tensho. He roared, more out of instinct than an actual battle plan. Blue met purple, and for one incredible moment the two waves of energy pushed against each other in a struggle for dominance. But it was not to last. Quickly enough, purple overwhelmed blue and a weakened version of the attack persevered onward towards the Shinigami, son of A-. The Zero detonated on impact, and for not the first time today Ichigo was sent sprawling across the desert sand, now with tattered clothes and a few minor scorch marks marring his skin. Not a second later and Chad came crashing down next to him, knocked away by a nasty hit courtesy of Dondo Chaka. Hey Chad, Ichigo paused so he could pant a few times. How's your first day of training going? It could be better. The giant replied after his own bout of heavy breathing. Yeah, me too, buddy, me too. Ichigo sighed out as he climbed back to his feet, wincing from his injuries as he did so. Las noches, Aizen's private quarters. Knock knock. Ikemaru Jin sing-songed jokingly as he slid the door open and stepped into the room. Aizen glanced at his subordinate through his peripheral vision. What is it, Jin? Aizen asked as he looked over the profiles of individual Arrancar on his desk. So many under his command and yet so few of them actually useful. Surely there was a better purpose for all the numeros than having them lounge about Las Noches all day. Just wondering about something. Jin responded innocently, leering over Aizen's shoulders to read the folder in the man's hands. And that is? Aizen asked, moving his work aside and resting his head on one propped-up arm. The real reason you invited those two boys here. Oh? Aizen muttered in amusement. Have you decided to start questioning me, Jin? Not at all, Captain Aizen. Jin said in a way that was both disarming and slippery. I was just curious about it. Aizen turned and regarded his lieutenant. A man he could trust completely and not trust at all at the same time. A paradox that had entertained him for over a century. Jin, did you know that one of the first laws that Soul Society established after the formation of the Central 46 over 1,000 years ago was that it is illegal for a Shinigami to breed with a human in the living world? Jin tilted his head slightly to the side and his usual grin shrank to something more neutral. I didn't. Should I presume there was an incident of some kind? Aizen let a small chuckle escape his throat. Not at all. To the best of my knowledge, there has never been a human with Shinigami parentage ever born before Ichigo Kurosaki. The law was one of precaution. Made out of fear. Ikemaru's grin disappeared from his face entirely. I don't follow. He said, confused. Humans of the living world are beings of change. Of evolution. A child born in the living world reaches adulthood in about 2 decades, whereas a soul born in Soul Society takes upwards of 10 times that length. Souls in the afterlife, as the humans call it, are much more resistant to change. Just as it takes a great deal of time for us to age, so too does it take us years to raise our strength, and several centuries to reach our full potential. Whereas a human could hypothetically do those 2 things in weeks and a few years respectively. Prodigies in even less time. You can easily see why Soul Society would be wary of the idea of humans being born with Shinigami abilities. Just as you were curious when you stepped into this room, so too am I curious about the limits of Ichigo. You actually believe he'll get strong enough to matter? Jin asked, surprised. My earliest projections have the war against Soul Society to begin in 3 months. 3 months training for an average human is close to 2.5 years for a Shinigami, and Ichigo Kurosaki is anything but average. His spiritual growth rate since awakening his powers has been off the charts. I expect interesting things from him. Ikemaru whistled in appreciation. Well, I guess that answers one question. What about the big one that came with him? Aizen made a dismissive wave with his hand. Yasutora Sato is of no consequence to me. Spiritually empowered humans have popped up from time to time throughout history, but aside from the Quincy's, none of them ever did anything worth mentioning. I brought him along for no reason other than Ichigo wouldn't have willingly left him behind. Although I will admit that despite his unimpressive origins, it is possible Yasutora Sato will be pushed to heights greater than any other human has reached before him. The opportunity to train against Arrancar is a unique one after all. If he reaches such a level, then he will be used accordingly. Karakura Town, 2 days later. Just over 24 Shinigami stepped out of the Senkamin gate that had appeared in the skies above the small town. They were divided into 6 groups of 4, not including the man in charge of them all on this mission. In each of the groups of 4 was one Shinigami from the 12th Division who held a small box with a radar-like device protruding from it. These special boxes could detect minuscule traces of any particular Shinigami's Ryatsu even months after the Shinigami had been there, provided that the scene hadn't been contaminated by other bouts of large spiritual power. Currently these boxes were attuned to the Ryatsu of Rukia Kachiki, using the only thing that remained of her as a guiding system. The pieces of her Zanpakuto. Spread out, men! Before the day is done, I want a full map of all the places Rukia traveled to while she was stationed here. Every building, every street, every place she took a walk. If you find something interesting, come back to me straight away. Jushiro Yukitake barked out. He'd only been granted 3 days to get this done by the captain commander, and he couldn't waste any time. Not after he so rudely demanded that he be placed in charge of the investigation team. Sir, yes, sir. The other Shinigami called out as the teams broke off into multiple directions. Some towards parks, some down side streets, and one towards Karakura High School. While his men and the 12th Division members worked, Yukitake traveled towards the spot where he believed it all started. He moved slower than he should have considering his tight schedule, but he found that he couldn't help himself. As he took in all the sights and sounds of the humble town, he imagined that Rukia's extended stay in the human world was a peaceful one. He had to believe that. Eventually he found himself in front of a 2-story yellow house with a green roof. He strolled into the alley next to it, and stared down at the base of a light post. This was the spot. According to Rukia's own testimony from after she was arrested, this was where she had given away most of her powers. Oh good. You're here. A voice said from behind him. I was getting real tired of waiting for someone to show. Wasn't expecting someone so important though. Yukitake didn't turn to look. Even inexperienced Shinigami paid humans no heed when they spoke. It wasn't like they were talking to them after all. Can't talk to someone you can't even see. Oi! The voice yelled out, a bit affronted. I know it's been 20 years, but are you really giving me the silent treatment, Jushiro? Don't you want to come inside and ask about Rukia? Yukitake continued to stare at the spot where his subordinate's life was irrevocably changed for the worse. Then he blinked as the words of the human actually hit him. His head snapped around and his eyes bulged at the sight of someone he presumed had died 2 decades ago. See Captain Shiba. Captain Yukitake rubbed his temples in frustration as he attempted to process the massive information download he had just received. Wait, let me review this. To make sure I have it all straight. Jushiro grumbled irritably. Sure. Go ahead. Isshin replied in a sagely voice with arms crossed and eyes closed. Aizen has been running illegal hollow experiments behind our backs for over a century, and when you two found out, he framed the both of you for treason, the captain said while looking at the other 2 men sitting at the table. Kisuke smiled behind his trademark white bamboo fan. Well, specifically he only framed me, but Tezai performed a forbidden keto to help save the lives of those Aizen experimented on, so it just made sense to bring him along too. The ex-captain of the 12th Division answered in a happy-go-lucky voice. Those he experimented on being the 4 Shinigami captains, 3 vice-captains, and second in command of the Keto Corps, who we presume to all have died 100 years ago, Yukitake said in an asking for confirmation sort of way. That is correct, Captain Yukitake. Unfortunately, we cannot share with you their location. Tezai responded as he refilled everyone's tea. And Captain Shihoin has been hiding with you all this time as well? Course I've been here. Yorichi commented derisively from the corner of the room. Where did you think I was? I honestly just thought you were killed by the infamous Urahara Kisuke as well. Yukitake commented dryly. Oh. You wound me, Jushiro. I thought we were friends. Urahara exclaimed with faux offense. Yukitake ignored the comedic outburst. And then 80 years after that, Captain Shiba became stranded in the human world because of a similar experiment of Aizen's, an incident with which you refused to share the details of. Yes. It's family business after all. Isshin nodded. Your human family? Yes. 2 daughters and a son. Your son that took Rukia's Shinigami powers and started this whole fiasco? Correct. Yukite's hands rose to rub his temples again. Okay, I think I've got it. Is that almost everything? Yukite asked almost pleadingly. No. We still need to go over a mystical artifact known as the Hovyoku, Aizen's more than likely creation of an army of Arrancar, and what we currently believe his end goal to be, the sacrificing of this city, its spiritually enriched land and all the souls within it to create his own copy of the Oken, the king's key that will permit him entrance to the realm of the Soul King. Kisup commented in a still far too cheery voice. Yukite sighed morosely and slumped his head down onto the wooden table. Suddenly looked his age as one of the 4 eldest captains currently serving in the Godii 13. This is going to be the longest report I'll ever have to write in my life. Hueco Mundo, Lost No Chase Medical Room, 3 days later. Ichigo and Chad had been in Hueco Mundo for close to a week now. Each of their days started with a pretty similar routine. Wake up in their overly drab living quarters, eat whatever food seemed to miraculously appear on a tray outside their doors, and then proceed to get the ever-loving shit kicked out of them in training. Currently the 2 were in preparations to begin that third part again. A nondescript Arrancar finished working on the torso, and moved his hands upward to a gash on Ichigo's arm that hadn't healed from the night of rest. The young Shinigami winced slightly as the Arrancar's hands glowed with a pale green energy, and he felt the wound stitch itself back together. After a few seconds the cut had sealed shut as though it was never there. You are now cleared for combat, the plain-looking Arrancar said in a monotone. Ichigo clenched his fists a few times and smiled. Damn, that's impressive. You work even faster than my friend Hanataro. I could do without all the stinging though. Is this one's work unsatisfactory? It asked in the same lifeless voice. What? No. I didn't say that. I only meant that, hey. Ichigo called out to the Arrancar that had stood up and was now stepping away. Yes? How can this one assist you? The Arrancar turned and asked. I just didn't get your name is all. Ichigo mumbled. This one's name is number 92. With that the Arrancar bowed once and walked away to parts unknown. What a weird guy, Ichigo whispered to himself. What do you think, Chad? Chad nodded in agreement as he gestured to his own departing medic that had acted about the same way. Those 2 aren't the only odd ones I've noticed. The one who brought me dinner last night was just as blank. It's as though there's a whole slew of Arrancar staffing this place that have been emotionally castrated. There's clearly something going on that we aren't aware of. Ichigo puzzled to himself. Well, we'll worry about figuring that out later. Nell and the others are expecting us soon. You ready to head back into the fray? Chad shot Ichigo his signature thumbs up of approval. Me too, big guy. I got a good feeling about today. Hueco Mundo, the desert just outside Las Noches. Later that day, Tensai Zangetsu pushed against Nelio's blade and a few orange sparks shot free from the grinding of metal on metal. The 2 combatants grinned at each other with mirth shining in their eyes. Their faces only about a foot apart. You still bored with me? Ichigo asked with a wide smirk. Well, you've gotten a little better, I suppose. She teased back. Does that mean you're going to release your Zanpakuto now? He asked, not trying to hide to excitement creeping into his voice. Ha! Nelio laughed. I said you're a little better. You've got a long ways before you can handle my resurrection. You haven't even seen all my normal tricks yet. Oh yeah? What are you still hiding? Ichigo questioned, calling what he believed was a bluff. Nelio's eyes suddenly shone with a familiar whimsical look as she lifted one finger off the hilt of her sword. With a deliberate slow movement she repositioned it to aim at Ichigo's face. Bala. Ichigo had enough time to widen his expression in surprise but not do much else before a small orb of purple energy shot off of Nelio's fingertip and exploded in his face. Their swords separated as Ichigo jumped away from their clash with one hand now clutching his eye. Arg! The hell was that? That was a bala. Nelio answered in a voice entirely too saccharine. While it doesn't hit anywhere close to as hard as a Siro, it moves at over 10 times faster to compensate. Did you like it? You could have blinded me. Ichigo screamed indignantly. Oh, don't be such a baby. I only used one finger. I'd need to build energy around my whole hand to do any real damage. Speaking of which, Nelio snapped her sword back into its sheath and clenched both of her fists in front of her, a thin coating of purple energy materializing around both of them. We're going to try something different, Bala Barrage. Ichigo suppressed a curse on the tip of his tongue as he started zipping around the sand dunes, dodging and weaving through the hailstorm of energy bullets that Nelio was releasing against him. Off to the side of the battle were 2 other Arrancar who were watching the skirmish with something between disinterest and sleep-inducing boredom. Hey Stark! A diminutive Arrancar called as she sat next to her resting companion. The Primera Espada yawned and scratched his side. What is it, Lillinette? Why are we out here again? She replied in a somewhat annoyed tone. I was just curious about the new guys is all. Stark grumbled as he laid back down with hands behind his head. You couldn't just check them out when they came back inside? I'm getting sand in my pants. Lillinette asked in exasperation. You don't wear pants. Stark retorted calmly as he closed his eyes to take another nap. You know what I mean. Lillinette bit back hotly. So we're out here, what do you think? Stark cracked an eyelid and glanced towards the Shinigami, now countering Nilio's attack with a black and crimson energy wave. He's alright, I guess. Stark conceded. And the other one? Lillinette asked with a head tilt towards the other battlefield. Stark craned his neck over his shoulder and watched as Chad sent off a huge energy blast that was slower than a zero of even the weakest tier of numeros in Aizen's army. Not worth my time. He sighed out as he shut his eye again. Meanwhile, with Chad, Yasutora Sato liked to think of himself as a stoic individual. That he could endure any amount of pain or hardship with a blank face and push on with nary a complaint. That being said, Peshquatish was really starting to piss him off. Said Arrancar grinned as he thought he saw a quick flash of anger in his opponent's face. His orders from his mistress Nilio this morning still ringing in his head. Get him mad, Pesh. Madder than he's ever been in his life. His power seems to be tied to his emotions. His strength increase so far has been negligible. Knocking him around some more isn't going to get the job done. Get him mad. Why are you even here, Sato? What's the point? Pesh taunted. To fight with Ichigo. To watch his back as he watches mine. To protect him. The giant yelled as he charged the Arrancar. Pesh sneered as he sidestepped the man's punches with ease. You mean like the way you protected your friends in Soul Society? Why, Pesh, that's going too far. Dando Chaka mumbled to himself from the sidelines. Shut up, Guatish. Chad snapped with a rare bout of anger breaking through his usual cool demeanor. Or you'll do what exactly? What can you do with how weak you are? I am not weak. Chad yelled as he continued to swing at Pesh. Just one hit. All he wanted was just one damn good hit. Yes, you are. Pesh mocked. Too weak to save your friends. Pesh ducked under a haymaker. Too weak to help Ichigo. Too weak to get the revenge you so desire. The Frachin swatted away a punch from Chad's human arm. Hell, you're too weak even to fight me, and I'm nowhere close to a captain's level. The Arrancar then enunciated his point with a quick double kick to Chad's chest, forcing some distance between them. As Chad slid away on the balls of his feet, he glared at Pesh with a look of utter hatred, and then his Ryatsu skyrocketed. I am not weak, Chad thundered as he reared his fist back. His right arm was cocooned in blue light for only a second, and yet by the time that second was over, the limb had undergone an evolution. Gone were the little wings by his wrist, and the solid red line down the middle. This new arm was a mixture of black and magenta with a large diamond-shaped plate protruding from his shoulder, and still his Ryatsu climbed. With a roar that can only be described as primal, he shot his fist forward and an absolutely gargantuan stream of energy erupted out of it. Pesh was frozen in shock at the sight of it. It was so much bigger, so much faster, so much more impressive than anything he had ever expected to get out of the human. I think I'm dead, Pesh. Dando Chaka screamed as his Sonito carried him at the fastest speed he could manage and tackled his friend out of the way. The blast ripped by the two with only a second to spare and continued onwards in the direction to a nearby sand dune. A dune that coincidentally had two Arrancar resting on it. Stark! Move! Lillinette Gingerback yelled as she leapt high into the air to avoid the wayward attack. Don't wanna too comfy, won't hurt me anyways, the Primera mumbled lazily as he rolled over onto his side. Stark waited half asleep for the attack that would at most sting his backside, but when after a few seconds it hadn't come, he opened his eyes slightly and glanced behind him. That Shinigami kid was standing in the way and pushing back against the energy wave with a Ryatsu-coated sword. Are you gonna move or not, you big idiot? The Shinigami screamed at him, struggling to hold the blast back. Stark sighed. Fine. While the Arrancar behind him climbed to his feet in the slowest and most casual manner possible, Ichigo reached the end of his patience at simply holding the blast back. He forced more Ryatsu into Tensao Zangetsu, and with great exertion punted the blast upwards into the sky. As the energy flew away into the distance, Ichigo fell to his knees in exhaustion with sweat pouring down his face. That was way too hard of a task after he was already mostly drained from a full day of sparring against Nilio. And now for some reason he had a splitting headache. Stark stretched his arms up like someone who had just gotten out of bed. Thanks, kid. I guess I owe you one. Your name's Sato, right? He paused to pant a few times. Ichigo. Oh, I wasn't paying too much attention at the meeting when Aizen introduced you and the other one. Most times I sleep through them. Is that right? Ichigo tried to joke. God, this headache was getting bad quickly. Lilith landed down next to Stark with a confused expression. Hey. Why'd you try and help Stark? She questioned. Because it was the right thing to do. Ichigo replied as though it were obvious. Ignoring the now metaphorical sledgehammers pounding in his brain, Lilith stared at the boy incredulously before chuckling at the ridiculousness of the idea. Selflessness in Hueco Mundo? It was a pretty rare thing. You know, you're not too bad, Shinigami. Feel free to pop in whenever you want. It gets boring with just Stark around. Lilith then disappeared with Sonito before she could get a reply. Stark sighed yet again. Damn it, Lilith, I'd have preferred to walk. Well, I guess I'll be seeing you, Ichigo. Stark said before vanishing in his own buzz of Sonito, just to be replaced almost instantly by Chad and Neelio running up to him. Ichigo. Are you alright? Chad asked, fraught with concern, momentarily forgetting that he was furious not a minute ago. Yeah, I'm fine, it's just this headache, Ichigo stammered as he held both hands to his head. I can fetch a medic if you'd like. Neelio said, trying to hide the worry in her voice. No, it's leaving now, I think I'm goo. Ichigo's eyes went blank as he passed out and fell face first into the ground. And something else finally broke free. The wind picked up speed around Ichigo's prone form as hollow Ryatsu suddenly began to pour out of him. The air became thick and heavy, forcing Chad down to one knee from its weight pressing down on him. Neelio's breath hitched as shards of white started manifesting in the air above the left side of Ichigo's face and latched onto him. Ichigo snapped upwards, revealing a manic face with 1/4 of a hollow mask covering it. The hollow Ryatsu still increasing as the creature started to cackle with madness. Dando Chaka. Get Sato out of here! Neelio ordered as she drew her sword. Said Arankar appeared with a flash and latched onto the human before any objections could be made. Yes, Mistress Neelio. Dando Chaka then buzzed away with his passenger just as quick as he came. He, so this is Hueco Mundo. I love it! The air is so wonderful here. So rich. I can't believe it took me this long to take over. Thanks for softening him up, by the way. I couldn't have done it without ya. The being exclaimed as the mask expanded towards Ichigo's jawline. Who are you? Neelio demanded angrily with sword raised. Me? The creature questioned. I ain't got a name. And then he charged. Ichigo closed the distance between the two combatants in an instant, and swung Tensai Zangetsu in a wide slash. Neelio blocked the move with an intention to parry but was entirely unprepared for the increased physical strength Ichigo's body now seemed to possess. Ichigo's strength overwhelmed her own, forcing the espada to start sliding backwards. Where is Ichigo? Neelio ground out as she struggled to push back against her opponent's blade. Ichigo continued to cackle. He stepped out for the moment. But you don't need to worry about him. All that matters right now is I'm finally the one in charge. Suddenly the being changed tactics by disengaging from the clash and jumping into the air above. Hi! He screamed, slashing his sword downward and releasing a black and crimson Getsuga. That won't work! Neelio yelled as she held her palm high, quickly charging a purple Siro to intercept the attack. The two blasts met in midair, creating an explosion which obscured the fighters' view of each other. It already has! A voice screamed as Neelio felt a hand clamp down on her shoulder from behind. She only had enough time to turn her head in shock towards her attacker before the black blade came down again, and consumed them both in a pillar of black Ryatsu. After a few seconds Neelio jumped out the side of the tower, trailing smoke and black flame-like Ryatsu that had clung to her as she exited. She was panting heavily and her pristine white suit had burned away in several places. The pillar finished dissipating entirely, revealing Ichigo standing in the middle perfectly unharmed. The white mask still spreading as it crept slowly across his jawline. On the sidelines Chad, Dando Chaka, and Pesh all watched in disbelief at the exchange so far. Mistress Neelio is losing, Dando Chaka mumbled as he gnawed on his thumb. No. She's still got plenty of cards left to play. Above all, she still has her resurrection, Pesh said, sounding more like trying to convince himself than stating a fact. Pesh glanced to the human next to him who was watching the fight with fists clenched painfully tight. Hey Sato. Are we good? You know I was just trying to get a rise out of you in our fight, right? He asked cautiously. Not right now, Pesh. Chad nearly spat out as he focused on Ichigo. Ah. Right. Not the best time. Pesh conceded. Down on the battlefield Neelio was trying to pin down her foe by firing off half-powered Siros in quick succession. You aren't ever going to beat me with little shots like those. The being taunted as he dodged them easily. Try this one on for size. He pulled Tensou Zangetsu back and let the familiar black and crimson coat the blade again. However, instead of releasing the Getsuga, he pushed more and more energy into the sword. The flames grew and grew until they extended behind Ichigo for several meters. Here's a proper attack! Ichigo screeched as he swung his blade out and released a Getsuga that was just under 3 times the size of the ones he had unleashed before. Nilio stood her ground with eyes full of steel as the attack barreled down on her. Then she smirked. Just as the wave was upon her, Nilio opened her mouth and breathed in deep. Ichigo's crazed grin fell to one of confusion as he watched the espada literally start to drink his attack. The energy all being funneled into her throat via some unknown mechanism. That's the setup for Mistress Nilio's Siro Doble. Dondo Chaka commented on the side. She absorbs her opponent's Siro and then sends it right back after mixing it with one of her own. Pesh rubbed his chin in mild contemplation. Ichigo's Getsuga must be similar enough to a Siro when he's in this state to allow the technique to work. Still, talk about a risky move. Nilio finished slurping up the attack and reared her head back slightly. BYA! She snapped back forward and literally spat out a purple Siro that traveled at a much faster speed than her traditional ones. Ichigo's manic grin came back with a vengeance. Oh, that is so cool! How do I learn how to? The Siro connected and the colossal explosion that followed seemed large enough to reach all the way into the sky. A shockwave spread out from the impact, kicking up sand and rock in every direction. Nilio's hair blew about wildly in the artificial wind as she waited to see what had become of her opponent. When the devastation cleared, she could only frown. His clothes were in tatters and he was favoring one side in his stance, but he seemed to be in relatively good condition. Yes. More. Give me more. This exquisite feeling. The thrill of battle. I want more. Ichigo screamed. The mask now spread over 2/3 of his face. Before the day is done, I will have made you regret asking for that. Nilio promised as she held her Zanpakuto out in front of her. Declare, Gamuza. The blade shone a brilliant pink and seemed to waft off smoke of the same color. Then in an instant, a massive orb of purple Ryatsu burst into form around her. During its brief existence, the sphere expelled an incredible amount of energy. Like a bomb going off in the middle of the Hueco Mundo desert. Ichigo was forced to raise his arms over his face to protect his eyes from flying debris. The orb cleared away and revealed a new version of Nilio. She was now in a centaur's body, and the horns of her hollow mask had unfolded, her weapon now taking the shape of a double-sided silver lance. Ichigo whistled in appreciation. Riding you takes on a whole nother meaning now, doesn't it? So crude, Nilio dismissed in a whisper as she raised her weapon to launch it. Hee, I'm getting excited now. The being cackled again. You're so much stronger than you were a second ago. I can't wait. Ichigo's free hand shot upwards and started clutching at the edge of his mask. Give me back my body, a voice suddenly demanded from inside his head. What? No. Not yet. I just got out. It isn't fair. Just give me a little more time. Ichigo begged as he started writhing and flailing around. Nilio cocked an eyebrow at the display and lowered her lance back down. What? Are you worried about your little girlfriend? I wasn't going to kill her, I swear. I was only going to rough her up a bit. Just some good old-fashioned fun. Don't make me go back in there. Please. I just wanted to be the one in control for once. Is that so wrong? You've had your turn and now it's mine. The mask started to crack and splinter as the hand pulled harder and really started to wrench it off his face. I'll remember this, Ichigo. I'll make you regret it. If you can't share, then I will become the king. I'll be BARRGGH. The being shrieked in pain as the mask finally broke away entirely and crumbled into small porcelain shards on the ground. The yellow color vanished from Ichigo's eyes and he collapsed to his knees in exhaustion. He stared at the ground as he tried to regain control of his breathing. He vaguely registered a trotting noise approaching him, and by the time he got his bearings, Nilio was standing above him. He looked up and their gazes met. He tried to look apologetic, but Nilio's expression remained unreadable. We are going to see Lord Aizen right now, she said in a demanding tone. Soul Society, Captain's meeting. Captain Yukitake finished his rather extensive report from his mission in the human world and stepped back into line to the left side of Captain Kenpachi. Each of the other 9 captains took the news differently. Yamamoto was stoic as always. His eyes closed, and his hands on his cane. Suifeng had looked ready to murder someone ever since Yukitake revealed the whereabouts of Yorichi. Meanwhile, Unohana was the opposite, with her hands folded inside her sleeves and her gaze pointed downwards in quiet contemplation. Byakuya was attempting to maintain his air of nobility, and failing as he processed the reasons why Rukia was put to death. He couldn't pick who to hate more. Urahara Aizen, or himself for letting it all happen and doing nothing. Kamimura's wooden mask revealed nothing, but one of the captains could have sworn they heard him growl at one point. Kayaraka hid his face beneath his hat to not let the others see the deep sadness in his eyes. Hitsugaya was torn between feeling pure hatred at Aizen for the depths of his schemes and worrying about his own job security since Captain Shiba was found alive. Kenpachi looked extremely bored and ready to fall asleep at what was turning out to be the longest captain's meeting he'd ever had to attend. Only the mention of a probable Arrancar army kept him somewhat focused. Kuratsuchi shared his enthusiasm for the possibility of encountering Arrancar, however for him it was because of darker, crueler, and far more scientific reasons. After a few more moments of silence, Commander Yamamoto cracked his eyes open and began to speak. The new members of Central 46 will not be taking office until the end of the month. Until that time it is within my authority as captain of the 1st Division of the Godai 13 to make the following decrees. Memorize them. The other captains all straightened their backs a little and wiped their faces clean of lingering emotions as they prepared to receive new marching orders. First, ex-captains Kasuke Urahara and Yoruichi Shihoin as well as former captain of the Kido Corps Tezzai Tsukabashi are cleared of all charges or accusations of wrongdoing that occurred in the holification incident a century ago. They will be invited back to Soul Society, but are not required to leave Karakura town as they are the only ones who can contact the surviving Shinigami officers that Sosuke Aizen experimented upon. Yamamoto tapped his cane once to the floor to signify that his words were now law. Second, former Captain Isshin Shiba, now known as Isshin Kurosaki, will be forcefully escorted to Soul Society to explain in person to me the reasons he chose to abandon his duty and stay in the human world. If I find his reasons to be lacking, then both he and his family will be permanently relocated to Soul Society. Captains Unohana, Kachiki, and Yukitake will be responsible for escorting him as well as informing the relevant parties mentioned in the first decree. Another tap of the cane and Yukitake's objections died in his throat before he ever got to voice them. Third, all captains are to begin preparing their squads for wartime combat levels. We have no info on the extent or capabilities of the Arrancar army. The possibility of such a fighting force threatens the very existence of Soul Society itself, and we will do whatever is required to prepare for it. If soldiers must train from dawn to dusk every day to do so, then so be it. Losing is not an option the world can afford. A third tap of the cane and Kairaku sighed as all his free time for the foreseeable future vaporized in less than 30 seconds. Fourth, we are now seeking for capable Shinigami among our ranks to fill our missing captain slots. If former captains Urahara, Shihoin and Shiba do not take up captain positions, then we will need the numbers. Before I continue, does anyone have any recommendations they want to make? One captain stepped forward. Yes, Commander. My best patrol leader in the Anmitsukido. His name is Shusuke Amigai, and he claimed to have achieved Bankai around 2 years ago, Suifeng stated proudly. Yamamoto nodded. Very well. Have patrol leader Amigai appear here in the morning. Captains Kamimura, Kairaku, and myself will administer the captain competency exam. Thank you, Commander. Suifeng said with a quick bow and then stepped back in line. Fifth, the status of missing is hereby revoked for the runaway prisoners Ichigo Kurosaki and Yasutora Sato. For allying themselves with the traitor Aizen, their right to a fair trial is now void. They are henceforth branded enemies of Soul Society, and all captains are issued a kill-on-sight order for them. Yukitake grimaced as he realized he'd have to tell Isshin about that as well. That is all. Dismissed. Las Noches, throne room. So I hear you both had an interesting day. Aizen intoned with amusement clear in his voice. The Lord of Las Noches was relaxing casually in his chair as he overlooked his audience. You've already heard? Ichigo asked in disbelief. But how? We came straight here after it happened. Aizen's grin spread a little at the boy's naivety. Is it not natural for me to have someone go investigate when a Ryatsu spike is detected? Okiura arrived to watch you all about a minute after Sato's powers evolved. Really? I didn't even sense him. Yes. Okiura is quite good at not being seen when he doesn't need to be. Admittedly, though, you were all quite distracted at the time. Let us move on, though. Sato, your development is the simpler one. We'll address that first. Do you think your abilities have finally reached their potential? Chad summoned his new right arm and stared at it intently. No, I know that this arm is stronger, but it feels wrong. Unfinished. My first arm felt right. Felt complete. But now that I've pushed through that barrier, I have this inner sense almost screaming at me that I have more of a ways to go. Not only that, but now that I have time to focus on it, there's a tingling sensation in my left arm when my powers are active. Like there's another ability just waiting to be found. Chad trailed off as his gaze shifted to his left hand. Fascinating. Perhaps you will be of some use after all, Yasutora Sato, Aizen thought. Alright, Chad. Ichigo cheered. His mood temporarily uplifted. Sounds like we have some fun spars ahead of us. Chad smiled and gave his best friend a quick thumbs up. Marvelous. Simply marvelous, Sato. It sounds like we need to find you a tougher opponent. No insult towards Nelio's fraction, but I don't believe they are a suitable challenge for you anymore. I will arrange for Aaron Carnell, 103 Dordoni Alessandro del Sacaccio to join you in your training sessions from now on. Chad's grin fell. I don't follow. Aizen tilted his head. What do you mean? Pesh and Dondo Chaka are Aaron Carr's 41 and 42. Wouldn't someone ranked in the hundreds be far weaker than them? Ah. I understand. It seems you have not yet picked up on the numbering system here in Las Noches. The Espada which hold the number 1 to 10 are indeed ranked in terms of strength. However, the numeros are simply numbered by the order in which they were created, with the exception of numbers 90 to 99 which are reserved for 10 non-combat Arrancar that attend to various chores around the palace. Furthermore, the ranks from 100 to 120 have been set aside to be used for members of the Privaran Espada. They are Espada that have been demoted for one reason or another, usually due to being replaced by someone more powerful. Aizen explained, sounding proud of himself for coming up with such an interesting system. Ichigo and Chad turned to look at each other with the same puzzled look. Not to be rude, Aizen, but that's pretty dumb. Ichigo spoke hesitantly. Terrible system. Chad added under his breath. What? Aizen asked, feeling genuinely affronted. Why have some ranked by combat strength and others not? Ichigo questioned as he started to count off his fingers. It was a measure to stop infighting among the numeros. Although it really hasn't worked very well, Aizen added as an afterthought. What happens if you get too many numeros? Do you just skip from numbers 89 to 121? Chad threw out. Aizen's eyebrow twitched. Yes, that is what I would do, he answered, his patience wearing thin. Do you even have 20 Privaran Espada? What if you end up exceeding that number? Ichigo asked, ticking off a third finger. I have had 7. There is plenty of spaces still available. Aizen replied, now thoroughly annoyed. What about when? Quiet. Aizen demanded softly as the air suddenly increased in weight 1,000-fold. The full brunt of his spiritual pressure crushing down on the two before him. Chad dropped to his hands and knees, and while Ichigo managed to remain standing, he seemed to have forgotten how to breathe. Aizen released the pressure, and the two started gasping for air. Your criticisms were not asked for, and in the future you will do well to remember that this is my home you are guests in and my organization that you agreed to join. If I want your opinion, I will ask for it. That being said, I will consider revising the numbering system to reflect the one the Espada operate under. Are we clear? Yes, sir. Ichigo and Chad replied as they looked at the floor. Good. Now, Ichigo, why don't you tell me about this inner hollow of yours? Aizen asked, now having returned to his default state of sounding amused while looking smug. Ichigo suddenly looked nervous and wished to be anywhere else. I am not sure where it came from, but Aizen mused to himself as he remembered his experimental hollow white attacking Isshin Shiba and the events that followed it. Why don't you take a guess, Ichigo? Surely you must have some idea of its origin. Aizen offered congenially. When I was being trained by Urahara, he had me obtain my Shinigami powers by severing my soul chain. By the time I found them, my inner world was already collapsing. I only managed to avoid becoming a hollow by a few seconds. Could it have been born there? Ichigo asked, hoping for an answer. I can work with that, I see. It's certainly possible that a hollow was born within your soul that day. A being that is you and at the same time isn't. The hollow that you would have become had you been unsuccessful in becoming a Shinigami. It exists buried in your soul like a dormant split personality. Aizen lied smoothly. Ichigo's eyes seemed fearful. So what can we do about it? This is the first time I've encountered a situation like this. For the time being, I believe it best to adopt a wait-and-see approach. See if you have any more incidents and discover exactly what triggers them. What we need right now is more information, Aizen suggested while looking thoughtful. And what I need is time to formulate some theories on what will happen when I use the Hogyoku on you. I understand. Ichigo muttered dejectedly. But we will deal with it eventually, right? He added hopefully. Of course, Ichigo. Just as soon as we know more. Ichigo snapped forward in his bed with a cold sweat covering his body. He tried to reassure himself that it was just a dream. Just another nightmare like the other ones. Unfortunately, the faint cackling laughter in the back of his mind told him it wasn't a coincidence. He couldn't sleep soundly ever since his run-in with his inner hollow 2 days ago. Why? Why are you doing this to me? He thought in desperation. There was no verbal reply, but instead an impression of a plan hit his mind. An Ichigo without sleep was an unfocused Ichigo. An unfocused Ichigo was a weak Ichigo, and a weak Ichigo was easy prey. Like, I'll make it that easy for you, Ichigo grumbled to himself. He wiped the sweat off his face with his blanket, and looked towards the clock resting upon the white dresser. Its bright green numbers the only source of light in the darkness. 2:18, huh? So that's an hour and 40 minutes of sleep between the nightmares. Shit. The gaps are getting shorter. Not feeling like subjecting himself to more harassment from something invading his dreams, Ichigo reluctantly swung his legs over his bed and began getting dressed for the day. He slid open his closet and saw a huge array of uniquely designed white clothing and of course a single Shinigami Shihakusho. He briefly pondered wearing one of the white outfits. The material certainly looked comfortable, and the imagined reactions of the others seeing him dressed like the Arrancar got a chuckle to escape his throat. However, in the end he went with the familiar black. As he slipped his arms through the sleeves, he couldn't help but talk to himself. You know, I'm not sure if I should feel grateful or creeped out that someone keeps putting a fresh outfit in my closet when I'm sleeping. Ichigo exited his room and started walking without a destination in mind. Nothing to do for a few hours. Might as well go exploring. Maybe clear my head. Close to 2 hours later he began to really regret not doing this with a guide, as he was completely and hopelessly lost. Damn it. This is the 5th corridor I've found that looks just like this, or did I finally make my way back to the 3rd one? Why the hell would you design a place like this? At least put up signs. Hey you! Shinigami! This is all your fault, isn't it? A voice screamed at him from behind. Ichigo turned around and watched as an Arrancar with serrated teeth and a green cloth wrapped over half his head stomped towards him. You're the one who convinced Lord Aizen to change the number system, aren't you? He accused. Ichigo blinked. Wow, that was quick. It hasn't even been a full 2 days. When did this happen? Just now. Lord Aizen had a meeting with all the numeros. What do you have to say for yourself? You guys had a meeting at 4 in the morning? Ichigo asked incredulously. A second Arrancar, this one with black braided hair and a mask topped by a long spike pointing to the right, approached the two in a brisk walk with his arms folded behind him. You'll have to forgive Deroy, Mr. Kurosaki. He's a little upset at the moment over his new ranking. To answer your question though, I think you'll find that the 24-hour day means very little within Hueco Mundo. When there is no sunrise or sunset, time just seems to blend together. You're damn right I'm upset. The Arrancar, now identified as Deroy, protested. Before I was number 16. One of the oldest numeros in Lord Aizen's army. I had respect. Seniority. Now everyone will just see me as the lowest ranking fraction. Even that bitch Loli was laughing at me. Not to interrupt, but who exactly are you two? Ichigo asked. The taller Arrancar turned to Ichigo and gave a courteous half-bow with one hand on his chest. My apologies, Mr. Kurosaki. How rude of me. We are both fractions serving under Espada number 6 Grimjow Jagerjacks. I am the newly designated Arrancar number 19 Shalong Kofan, and my comrade here is Deroy Rinker, who now holds the title Arrancar number 44. Deroy huffed as his rank was revealed. Nice to meet you. Call me Ichigo. None of that Mr. Kurosaki stuff, he said while extending his hand. And you may call me Shalom, the Arrancar said with a smile as he shook the Shinigami's hand. So you both work under Grimjow, huh? I haven't really had the chance to talk to the guy. What's he like? Before the Arrancar could answer, Ichigo's stomach rumbled and the Shinigami looked away a little embarrassed. And do you know where I could get some food around here? I've been exploring the palace, but I'm kind of lost, he continued. Shalong chuckled. Yes, Ichigo. If you'll just follow me, we can talk on the way. Deroy followed behind the two, grumbling the whole way. Soul Society, Commander Yamamoto's office. Isshin Kurosaki was marched through the double doors with spirit suppression cuffs over his wrists and 3 captains at his back. He was stopped at the center of the room and stared straight ahead unfeelingly at his former boss. Release him, Yamamoto said gruffly from his position in front of his desk. Captain Kuchiki twisted a key into a slot on the side of the restraints, and they snapped off with click. Leave us, the commander then demanded. Captains Unohana, Kuchiki, and Yukitake all turned and headed for the door. Yukitake hesitated for a moment as if to say something, but must have thought better of it and left through the exit without a peep. Isshin rubbed his wrists where the restraints were a moment ago. I suppose, he started, I should at least thank you for having the courtesy to wait until my girls were at school before you had me dragged out of my own home at sword point. A coincidence? Yamamoto dismissed. You really are heartless, aren't you? I am whatever soul society needs me to be. I rarely have the luxury of compassion. Isshin sighed. What do you want, old man? I told Jushiro at my home that I was stranded in the human world, and that is the only thing you told him. Yamamoto countered. I want a full briefing. Every detail. I want to know exactly how one of my most promising captains went out on a simple scouting mission, vanished, and then reappeared 20 years later with 3 children. Explain it to me, he demanded. So Isshin took a deep breath and began his story. About how he was attacked by Aizen and an experimental hollow under his command that was possibly Vasta Lord class in strength. He talked about a passing Quincy girl saving his life and about how he gave up his powers to return the favor. For over half an hour he talked and talked until his tale concluded with his powers returning to him rather recently. Yamamoto hummed to himself as the story finished. Do you know why your powers have come back after all this time? I can speculate. Will you? No, Yamamoto huffed. Very well. It doesn't affect my decision. I do not agree with your chivalrous choice to trade your powers to save the girl's life. You were a captain of the Godai 13, and you had responsibilities far beyond that of saving one human. Secondly, I feel the need to remind you that it is illegal for Shinigami to father human offspring. The mother being a Quincy only makes the transgression even more egregious, although you yourself were powerless at the time your genetics were not. Third, you did not even attempt to contact Soul Society and explain your situation. So what? You gonna chuck me in prison for abandoning my post? Failing my sacred duty? Some shit like that? Isshin scowled. Yamamoto cracked his eyes open. No. If Central 46 were in session, I have no doubt that that is the decision they would make. However, for the moment I am in charge. What Soul Society does not need right now is to throw a captain-class fighter away when we are at the cusp of war. You will be taking up the vacant captain position for the 9th Division, and you are confined to Siriidii for a probationary period of 3 years. You may leave only to partake in major battles and pick up your daughters this evening to relocate them to Soul Society. And if I refuse, then I will take your daughters from you and personally register them in the Shinigami Academy by this time tomorrow with specific instructions to turn them into the most heartless killers the Godai 13 has ever seen. You wouldn't? Isshin snarled. Try me, boy. I am whatever Soul Society needs me to be. And what it needs from me right now is getting you to lead the 9th. Are we in agreement? Fine. I agree. Isshin spat. On 2 conditions. Name them. Yuzu and Karen get to live with me in the squad barracks. They don't have to stay with the Shibas in Rakangai. Any training they receive, if any at all, is done under my supervision. Done. And the second? You will remove the kill on sight order for my son immediately. Something which I'm sure you only put over his head to make me cooperative anyway. Yamamoto allowed himself to grin. It was so nice when a plan came together. Agreed. The desert just outside Las Noches. Later that day, Nelio frowned and lowered her sword back into its sheath. We're done for the day. What? No, I can keep going. Ichigo protested. Ichigo. You're swaying on your feet. You clearly haven't slept much, and on top of all that you refuse to enter your Bankai. What's the problem? I'm just trying to get more practice in with Zangetsu in his normal state. I can't just jump straight to my Bankai every time I enter a fight. Nelio narrowed her eyes. You know how I feel about you lying to me, Ichigo. She threatened. Ichigo averted his gaze and swore under his breath. How does she always see through me? I can't. He wants me to. Ichigo explained. Who? She demanded. Him. I can feel him in my head. He's taunting me. Daring me to activate my Bankai. Do you think he'll be able to grab control again? She asked blankly. I don't know, maybe I'll probably be able to hold him back. Ichigo guessed uncertainly. So if you think you can mentally restrain him, what's the problem? I might not be able to. He might get out. Ichigo yelled as if that explained everything. And if he does, then I will subdue him until you wrest back control. So I ask again. What is the problem? Ichigo hesitated a moment before speaking. He could hurt you. Nelio sighed as her default look of impassiveness melted away and a soft smile made its way to her face. It's touching that you're worried about me, Ichigo. Very charming, but our goal here is to train you. We were making healthy progress before he appeared, and we won't be stopping on his account. In case you have forgotten, I am a member of the Espada and not some fragile little woman. Now release your Bankai before I... A buzz of sonido interrupted her as Ulquiorra appeared in the space between the two. Ichigo Kurosaki. Lord Aizen has requested your presence immediately. I have been assigned to escort you. He stated with an emotionless voice. What is this regarding Ulquiorra? Nilil inquired. His eyes briefly shifted to the lower-ranked espada. I am not required to answer that. If you wish to know, you may follow us. Ulquiorra turned his eyes back to Ichigo and placed his hand on the young man's shoulder. Then with another buzz the two vanished from the desert. Las Noches throne room. A few minutes later, Ichigo stood before the stone monument that held Aizen's chair at the top, waiting for the man to appear. Off to the side of the room 4 others stood along the wall. Chad looked nervous for his friend and wondered what the reason for this summons was. Nilil felt the same, only she hid it better. Ulquiorra stared straight ahead without looking at anything in particular, and Chad's new training partner Dordoni felt out of place and was regretting tagging along. Slow footsteps clicked on the stone pavement from above as Aizen appeared with a pink-haired Arrancar at his side. Ichigo recognized the Arrancar as one of the Espada but couldn't recall ever speaking to him. The leader of Las Noches sat down in his chair and rested his chin on his fist. Thank you for bringing him, Ulquiorra. You are excused. Dordoni, my apologies that you came all this way, but this meeting does not concern you, Aizen said politely. Ulquiorra left slowly and calmly without a word, whereas Dordoni tried to leave with as much haste as possible, while still maintaining a sense of grace. Let it not be said that he didn't know a dismissal when he heard one. Nilil and Sato. You may both stay. I have no doubt Ichigo would tell you both anyway. Tell me what exactly? Ichigo spoke up. Aizen closed his eyes and looked to be in thought for a moment. Where to begin? He asked no one in particular. Tell me, Ichigo. How important would you say information is when preparing for a war? It depends. Ichigo answered noncommittally. Good intelligence is of extreme importance. There is a saying that knowing is half the battle, but I personally think that to be an understatement. In the years before I left Soul Society, I installed a number of devices all over Siriidii as well as a few other areas of interest, and kept them hidden through the use of a custom Kido. These devices transmit information such as Ryatsu readings and audio recordings to a control room here in Las Noches, where several individuals comb through it for noteworthy intel. Unfortunately, in my absence, many of these devices have been discovered and subsequently shut down by the 12th Division. However, for at least the short-term future, we are still getting enough information to have a good idea of what's going on outside this palace. What does this have to do with me? Ichigo asked. You'll understand momentarily. Part of me wished to keep this from you, but imagining your reaction if I did convinced me I shouldn't. Sayo, would you please read the relevant readings from devices KT-018 and SS-237? Yes, Lord Aizen. The Espada said as he adjusted his mask glasses. At 11:02 local time, Karakura Town, 3 large Ryatsu signatures appeared out of a Senkamin gate. The patterns matched with Captains Retsu Unohana, Byakuya Kuchiki, and Jushiro Yukitake. 12 minutes later at 11:14 the 3 Ryatsu signatures disappeared back into the Senkamin alongside a 4th much lower Ryatsu pattern that our database did not recognize. Ichigo's eyes widened fearfully as he made a guess as to what was coming next. At 12:49 a.m. conversation was recorded between 2 mid-ranking Shinigami officers outside the 1st Division's barracks. The subject of their conversation was that Captain Isshin Shiba, who has been missing in action for 2 decades, was brought into Siriidii with spirit suppression cuffs over his wrists and was being escorted by sword point to the Captain Commander's office by 3 captains. Would you like me to read the actual transcript, Lord Aizen? No, Sale. I do not believe that to be necessary. Please return to your station and keep me up to date on further developments. Of course, Lord Aizen. Sale said with a bow before excusing himself.